another edition of Turned Out a Punk. I'm your host, Damian Abraham, and once again, I'm bringing you a conversation with someone who grew up listening to punk, may or may not still be involved with punk, but had their life changed by the genre in a major way. And today on the show, huge guest, one of wrestling's hottest free agents, Tommy End, is on the show. You may know him by the former name of Aleister Black. You may know him before that as Tommy End. He is an incredibly talented wrestler and an incredibly smart person, and this is a very fun conversation. I'm excited for you to hear it. More on that in 1 second, but first, if you would like to get in touch with me, head over to the email address turnedoutapunkpodcast@gmail.com. That is run by my brother and show producer and guest booker extraordinaire, except this week, where that credit belongs to @BadBadBrains on Twitter, who suggested this to Tommy and made that connection. So thank you very much to BadBadBrains for doing that. Thank you. If you would like to support the show, the best way to support the show is just by telling all your friends about it, letting everyone know that you know about this podcast, and that you can spread the word that way. You can also support it by subscribing to it and rating it on iTunes, and thank you very much to everyone that does do that. I really do appreciate it. Or you could head over to patreon.com/turnedoutapunk, and thank you to people that do check that out over there. I will be putting up a Tommy End video of this podcast very soon. I've got some other videos of some podcasts recently going up there as well. So thank you for supporting that thing and checking it out, everyone. Appreciate it. And speaking of support, this thing would not be possible without the kind, loving support of the fine folks at Vans, who came over for a few years ago and said, Damian, we like what you do, but just don't do it out of your own pocket, and we'll help you cover the costs of doing this thing. And they have helped me cover the costs of doing this thing, and it has been a unbelievably huge support for this thing. So I appreciate them for believing in it, and I long to get back to doing live things at the House of Vans and interviewing people and hanging out when those things reopen. Until then, though, check out the Channel 66 stuff that Vans is doing with former guests of the show and some future guests of the show, too. And yeah, so that is that. All right. Oh, Fucked Up, the band I play in, hence why my voice is hoarse. I was at the studio before I came back here and did a podcast before I came on this thing to record this intro. Anyway, it's been a long day, but anyway, my voice is holding up, and the band I play in, Fucked Up, is heading back out on the road. Once again, even though I've said it a few times now, I'm still in shock every time I get to say that. We're going out first with, and now I'm really in shock when I get to say this, Faith No More for a tour, a short tour with them, and then also playing Riot Fest. You can find those dates at fuckedup.cc. I believe there also, you just Google Fucked Up Faith No More and it'll come up. And I hope to see some of you at those shows. And we'll also be going on tour in the winter to do a kind of 10th anniversary of David Comes to Life. Matador Records is reissuing David Comes to Life and another 12-inch of singles that came out back then. 10 years. Can you believe it? 10 years. Time just melts away like butter in the sun. That works. And we are facing 10 years of David Comes to Life. So come out and see those shows. We've announced some dates in the East Coast, I believe, so far. And we just announced some dates over there in England. And I believe we also may be doing Ireland as well. I'm not 100% sure on that. But anyway, check those dates, grab those tickets, and hopefully I will see you there. And we will hang out. And it'll be like Turned Out a Punk, but in person. We can talk about stuff in person and bring records and local greenery. And anyway, we'll get into all that close to the dates. And pick up those reissues. Also, our good buddy Scotty Karate at Tank Crimes is putting out Fucked Up's Year of the Horse on vinyl. You can pick that thing up from tankcrimes.com. I think the rest of the last press is almost sold out, and there might be another press down the line, but grab those while you can. I'm really stoked about this thing. It's like a 90-minute long song, so bring a book, get comfortable. The liner notes are going to be amazing on this thing. And check that out. All right, on to today's show. Today on the show, it's my new friend, Tommy End. Tommy is someone who I've been a huge fan of for a very long time now as a pro wrestler. First hearing about him on the sort of European independent scene, becoming a fan of that, then watching him enter the WWE, and just like I think many fans, was frustrated by knowing how incredibly talented he was and just seeing where he was kind of positioned in the company and what they were doing with him. But he is incredibly talented and managed to make some incredible moments on that run in the WWE. And now he is back on the independents for now. He's probably going to sign with a company at some point, but we don't talk about that stuff here at Turn Down a Punk. I'm not going to ask him where he's going to sign. Like, obviously I'm curious, but like, really, who cares? We're here to talk about, Jesus and the Gospel Fuckers and the pro wrestling punk connection and like the stuff that truly is the lifeblood of this podcast. And Tommy is a fantastic guest to have on the show. Once again, thank you to at Bad Bad Brain or Bad Bad Brains. My internet's down right now, so I can't check it to verify that. But anyway, thank you very much for making the suggestion to Tommy, and it led to a conversation, which of course has led to this. But yeah, this is a fun one. I think you're going to enjoy this stuff. I'm not going to ramble on anymore. You can find Tommy on Twitter and Instagram at Tommy End. He does Black Mask clothing. You can find shirts and stuff that they put out. Most of his stuff sells out really quickly, but so go on his social media and see when the merch drops are kind of happening, the pre-orders. And yeah, that's it. Sit back, relax, and enjoy Tommy End on Turned Out a Punk. Tommy, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me, dude. I'm stoked.
Well, as I was just kind of alluding to you off air, I'm a massive fan of all your wrestling. For years, I've been a fan of you.
Thank you.
And so
Appreciate that.
Well, and I've always kind of like, I think you did an interview with Colt Cabana years and years ago. And I remember hearing you on that podcast being like, one day I got to talk to this dude about punk because I guarantee there's some connection there. And it was actually our mutual friend, George Pettit, that came back from Download Fest and showed me a promo that you had cut for his son. And I said, by God, one day we'll make this happen. And now finally, through the power of someone suggesting it on Twitter, it has come to be.
Yeah. It's funny how that goes, right? I remember cutting that promo because he told me that his son was like a huge wrestling fan, and he liked the character that I portrayed for WWE. And when it comes to kids and stuff like that, especially in wrestling, I rarely, and I mean rarely, say no, because like I remember when I was that age and wrestling was still magical. Excuse me, I'm drinking kombucha and this thing was just like risping up, so I just burped right into my mic. Anyway, yeah, and he asked me about it, and he's like, I'm really afraid to ask you, but would you mind? I'm like, no, fuck no, of course not, no, hell yeah, let's do it, man. And I remember I sat down and he came in running with the camera and stuff, and we made it like a little like an Aleister Black type promo, and it was fun, man. That's actually the first time I met Dallas as well. It was just the Download Festival stuff. And you know how festivals are. It's good vibes all around. It's good people all around, and it's great. It's great. So everybody's in a good mood. We're doing wrestling. I get to watch some of the coolest bands, that I've loved since childhood. I get to see them perform. I get to see newer bands like Touche Amore. I get to see them play as well. I got to announce Code Orange, and it was just fun. It was just really, really cool, man. It was a great experience. Absolutely.
Yeah. Like it feels like it's really, I think in the last 5 or 6 years that thin wall that existed between pro wrestling and punk rock specifically, or aggressive music, I guess, largely speaking, is finally breaking down. Like it always existed in the world of like the Limp Bizkits, but I mean like on like a real kind of DIY punk level and on a wrestling kind of independent level, it feels like that connection is gone really strong.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to say that I had a hand in that because I've always represented like, the alternative, like, metal and stuff. Maybe not as much as punk rock, but guys like, Mark Andrews, who were like big in the punk, and Pete Dunne as well. They brought that forward more, that punk. But I'd like to think that like from a like metal, black metal, alternative like music, thrash metal, like I'd like to think that I was not responsible, but in the line of people that made that happen. So, and it's like you said, like alternative scenes and wrestling always gone hand in hand. There's like, a lot of the old school punk hits, like yourself are big into like wrestling, deathmatch wrestling, indie wrestling, you know what I mean? And that's just a cool thing, that barrier, because there's something grimy and gritty about that underground scene that you and I love, that meshes so well with the crazy world of professional wrestling,
Yeah.
And it's cool that it connects people on multiple levels, like we're doing right now, So that's the beauty of it.
Yeah, and it goes back, right? Like, I remember, well, obviously it goes right back. Like Robbie Brookside, being on the show a number of times, has just kind of talked about like always trying to champion that. But like, I remember as a kid, seeing people like Andy Williams busting out wrestling moves in mosh pits, and then he's done it. Like he's that wrestler,
yeah.
And it's just it's there's always been that weird connection between these worlds. But yeah,
and it's funny because I met Andy before he was a wrestler, and now he works for one of the biggest companies in the world, and it's just like, it's cool because I met him at Sonosphere, where we with Progress Wrestling. Excuse me, that kombucha is just fighting me real hard right now. Where we were with Progress Wrestling, we were there, and like that's the first time I met him, and like we got set up through a mutual friends, because like one of our friends was like, man, you got to meet this dude, like you guys would get along so well, and Andy is just man, I've got so much love for that guy, and like the thing is like Andy is such a positive, bright, intelligent, good look on life guy. I look up to Andy a lot as a human being, and like now what he's doing as a performer, as a wrestler, it's inspirational that he just basically said, well, fuck it, I'm gonna do it, and he did it, and then he gets a contract for one of the biggest companies in the world. That's work ethic, that's talent, that's a whole bunch of things. But I like to think that a big part of that is also just him being a great human being, and everybody just connects with him really well.
Mm-hmm. It feels like a lot of the, like Amy Lita, when she was on the show, kind of had the same sort of story where like she looked at wrestling and was like, fuck, I love this, I'm going to do it. And just kind of went out there and did it. And it feels like a lot of this sort of generation of wrestlers were people that looked at it and kind of were like, okay, I'm going to do this, and kind of figured out, carving not necessarily traditional paths to get there, like kind of like completely different ways of achieving that dream.
Yeah. And no story, there's similarities, but no story is ever the same. And, whether you come from the United Kingdom, like Brookside, or you came from the United States, you traveled all through Mexico, like Lita, to make a name for yourself, or like me, like coming from a country that doesn't have any wrestling, to eventually finding myself in the land of wrestling, it's just cool that all these people have the same type of directions, type of feeling, because the emotions that we shared as to like, we really want to do it, that's all the same, like it's that drivenness, that passion, that willingness to turn that thing that you love so much into a part of yourself. That desire is just remarkable.
Well, I got to start this off the way they all start off, even though we've been starting for a little bit by now. But Tommy, how did you get into punk? Do you remember the first time you ever came across the genre?
So, and you and I briefly spoke about this. I was not necessarily, I wouldn't describe myself as someone who was into punk. I was into thrash, black metal, hardcore, and a little bit of punk, but more along the lines of like the old school Misfits, the more, I want to say, approachable punk, if that makes any sense. I mean, more like bands that more people were aware of in terms of like punk. Like I'm talking like even like later on, like especially when I was skateboarding, Pennywise and No Use for a Name, and like the more known punk bands. I wouldn't say that I was ever a consumer of like punk, but then at the same time, and we also spoke about this. One of the people in my life as a teenager was Fred Belay from Jesus and the Gospel Fuckers,
a legend.
Which is mind blowing. And
Yes.
I have some good stories about him as well. And I don't think a lot of people know that the reason why I know him is because he's Bob Schreiber's brother. Bob Schreiber, the MMA fighter, they are related. They are brothers.
What?
Yeah. So MMA legend Bob Schreiber, his brother is Fred Belay, the singer of Jesus and the Gospel Fuckers.
That is fucking crazy.
No. Yeah, it's legit. But that's how I knew him, because obviously Bob's stepson, Stefan, was my best friend growing up. And so me and Stefan, we would do, we would do pro wrestling. We would do, we would train together and stuff like that. And then I got introduced to Bob whilst also already doing martial arts, and that whole world is kind of meshed together. And then he was always like, man, you got to meet my Uncle Fred. And then eventually it was a night where I met Fred, who was a very crazy yet very intelligent human being. He was very charismatic, remarkable guy. And he was telling me that he used to be in a punk band, and he grabbed some of his records, and it was the white record with the Jesus and the cross. Yeah. It was Jesus on a dick, but
Yep.
and Jesus and the Gospel Fuckers. And I remember me and Stefan had like the biggest laughs at the lyrics. I remember one. What was the one? When you dressed up like an ordinary girl, you wouldn't get laid at all. Now you dress like a punk rock chick, you get banged through the wall. Those were some of the lyrics. And oh God, what was the other one? Oh, tiny blisters, itchy dick, dirty sluts, you make me sick. It was just all these crazy lyrics that they had. And I remember him telling me that the reason why he quit like punk, the reason why he stopped being involved in it, he felt he couldn't relate to the political turn that punk took, because you got to remember yourself, like they were active in like the late 70s, early 80s. They were around, they were like they were living in crack houses in the Netherlands, and Bob Schreiber at the time was like an 11, 12-year-old guy, little kid, telling me all these crazy stories about his drug habits as a kid, and like Fred, his older brother, doing the exact same. But then they get into this punk rock band, and they get a van. And Bob, at age like 13, 14, is their security. But he was beating people up. Like he was annihilating people as a 14-year-old. And it's just, all these wild stories about their like small touring life and living all over the place. And like, it was a very unique experience as a kid when you're like 15, 16 years old, and you get, you're involved with a guy like Fred Belay and Bob Schreiber, to hear their stories, to experience how they are as human beings. And, on a personal level, both were always very good to me. Bob, to this day, is still a mentor to me. Like every once in a while, like we'll talk. Bob is always someone who's been super supportive of my pro wrestling stuff, even though he was an MMA fighter. He always thought it was really cool. He said like, hey, might not be my slice of the pie, but I respect you for what you're doing, and you never quit doing it. You always went head on. And he was, and still to this day, he's always he's a very well-spoken individual for the incredible amount of violence that man has had in his past, and portrayed in the ring in his respective business. Bob was a great mentor, a great teacher, a great coach, and both gentlemen, I felt that were very important in my life growing up. Despite the interaction with Fred being very limited, he made a big impact on me, because here you are, 15, 16 years old. My childhood was difficult. But then, he was someone who was able to put things in place for me in a certain way. And like, he would, he would check up on me every once in a while. Like, we would talk. And every time me and Stefan went over, he was always a fun guy to be around. He was the guy that made me like unwind and forget about all the dreadness that was going on and all the, difficult periods in my childhood. He was definitely, if I look back at my childhood and like, there's not like a lot of parts where I'm like, wow, this is a part where I was happy. I was happy when I was with Fred, and I was happy when I was Bob. And that was always like a really positive thing for me. And still, like to this day, when like, again, like when I speak to Bob, it's always super positive. I'm happy to have someone like him in my corner,
Yeah, that's awesome. And it really, I don't know, like it's something that, probably comes from the fact that these guys were people that were like living through it in a real way when they were kids, seeing you living through it.
Yep. Yeah. And you couldn't tell them shit, you know what I mean? And people who've lived that life, you can't tell them anything. And I love that because they literally have the answers. I mean, you can't tell them that because you don't know. They know because they lived it. They went there. They were there. They've done it, and even for Bob to come where he is from where he came from, to build this empire with now like having a successful training school, up until recently having Stefan Struve in the UFC. So, having a lot of really successful fighters, it's a driving force for me as well, to just like, doesn't matter where you come from, what you do, what odds are stacked against you, you can do stuff. So it's always been like a good motivator for me to have him from that earlier years of my teenage life, have him there.
It's also really interesting when you look at it, and it runs deeper than just wrestling and punk having a connection. Like, and when I say punk, I also mean hardcore and thrash, like anything that kind of falls on that umbrella. But like, but like, I think combat sports, there's like a deep connection there too. Like you look at New York, you look at the guys, both camps in the Cro-Mags, you look at all the New York hardcore people, they all train Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. Like they're just in Japan with the Burning Spirits hardcore people. Like it feels like combat sports and pro and hardcore punk have sort of like this deep connection that goes back to sort of the inception of punk.
It is, both have violence within the boundaries of discipline, right? Both are practiced violent forms of violence, because music can be violent. Punk rock was violent. It was a statement. It still is a statement. Hardcore, same thing. Thrash, same thing. It's a statement. It's a feeling. It's something that you carry in your heart, on your heart. And it's the same with jiu-jitsu and with kickboxing and Muay Thai. They're disciplines that, teach violence, but what they really teach is discipline and being able to carry that on your heart and like focus energy. And that's what music does too. Like, the reason why you and I talk about music is because we love music. The reason why you and I can talk about martial arts is probably because we both love martial arts. And the same goes for pro wrestling. Everything comes down to, truly deeply loving the disciplinary love that it's given you. And I think what it teaches you as a person and what it brings you in your life, and all those factors, all those things, music, alternative music, hardcore, punk rock, all of that, they etch on each other. They carry each other.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I also find the history of Dutch punk, specifically punk in Amsterdam, so fascinating. I find the history of youth culture in Amsterdam so fascinating. Like I've been lucky enough to spend time and go to some museums there on tour, and just like, the squatting history, like the history of street violence that was going on there. And just how like you have a punk scene that gives us arguably one of the most intellectual punk bands to come out of this thing, and also gives us bands like Jesus and the Gospel Fuckers, like these like super real BGK, like all this like sort of like real street punk too at the same time.
I always forget the legendary squatting building in Amsterdam, and I spent a little bit of time there. And it's been gone for a while now, but that was one of the Frank Reich. That was one of the big squatter. Is it still that? I don't think it's that anymore. Oh, it actually is.
Oh, it is. Oh,
okay. It's legalized now. So back when I was there, it wasn't legalized. Yeah, it got squatted in 1982. I actually went there and I watched some punk bands play as a kid when I was like 15, 16 years old. And man, I have such good memories of Amsterdam. I have such good memories of Zaanstad and all the music scenes that we had there, and like all the local hardcore bands like 21 Gun Salute. Like I felt that, I lived that, and like one of the cool things was like so many of my friends that I still have now, were in all these bands, and like myself and my tag partner at the time, Michael Dante, which I'm sure you're aware of as well. We would wrestle Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and sometimes Monday, or sometimes Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And if we had to go to Germany, what we would do, we would wrestle for Westside Extreme Wrestling, and we knew our boys were playing in Rotterdam. We would, because it was usually Oberhausen, so it was just over the border. So we would wrestle, come back, go straight to the gig, support the boys, so everybody back in, and like back to like our base of operations, and everybody hang and chill. And it was good times. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It was just great times, and supporting your local hardcore bands and local punk bands, that is such an important thing. And I think that's also, going back to the discussion on like, why is there so much love between, wrestling and punk rock? It's because same with wrestling and hardcore. There's local shows, local indies. And I think that's, you talk about DIY, a lot of these indies are DIY. There's a lot of kids, like great athletic talents right now, right this second, and they're grinding away, and they're trying to make a name for themselves, and they're working hard, man. They're working hard to get their message out there, to get their art out there, to get their style out there. And for me, like I will always carry like a lot of love for the indies with me, because it's made me who I am. Mm-hmm. It's solely responsible for me being able to get to a massive platform like WWE, and being able to like give a piece of my soul to an audience that is millions, but if I would have not embraced that DIY indie independent scene and all the hardworking people on it, I would have never gotten there, and I would have never had so much love for the business that I have now. And funny enough, I was speaking to Finn McKenty from the Punk Rock MBA about a couple of days, like a week ago, and we were talking about like how sometimes you just have to absolutely hate what you love. You have to absolutely be disgusted by it. And at that point, there's two things. People are going to make two decisions. Number one, you're going to leave it alone, and it's going to pass you, and you're going to regret it. Number two is to endure it. You go through that gritty, bitter pill of hate that you have for the one thing that once brought you all the love in the world, and you find yourself having a new level of appreciation for the things that you once loved. And I am certain that for a lot of musicians, and maybe not even musicians, because in his case it was because he got sick of YouTube sometimes, and that's that happens to all of us. All of us, your passions at one point, they have to turn against you, because you have to realize what they are worth for you. And I feel that a lot of people, the ones that push through are the ones that are going to make it. So whoever needs to hear that part, whoever feels like they're in a situation where they feel that they are completely disappointed and disconnected from the thing that brought them all the love in the world at one point, I am telling you, go through it, and within no time you will have a new love and appreciation if you let it, for the thing that you once loved so much. I'm convinced of that.
Mm-hmm. No, I feel, and like I think, for a long time, especially with aggressive music, punk, and wrestling, you've got to do it because you love it. Because it's not like these opportunities to make it on this huge level are always going to be there. Like, you have to do it because you love it. And then if opportunities happen to present themselves, then so be it. But it's not always like that's going to be the case. I was going to say, it's also funny when I think back to that era in wrestling when, like you kind of exploded onto the scene. Everyone kind of exploded on the international scene. It felt like that was this moment very similar to like 1991 in music with Nirvana, and then ultimately Green Day and all these bands that exploded, where all these independent artists and wrestlers and athletes suddenly had the means of star production in their own hands through social media, through merchandising, and they could kind of create themselves, and make themselves into stars in a way that previously you would have had to rely on a company. Like, do you kind of look back on that era as being like a changing moment in wrestling? Like 2016, 2017, 15 even?
Yeah, I do. Specifically because I didn't necessarily get that part that much because, I started in 2000, had my first match in 2002. And I, at the time, like the internet was around, but like social media was not social media as it is now, like, sure, we had MySpace and eventually had Facebook. Specifically with the coming of like Facebook is where you could see changes. People were posting videos on the wall, promoters reaching out to you because promoters were now having, they had Facebook profiles for their companies, and like Facebook became a bigger thing. And then, Instagram came in, and it expanded, and this truly is an age of individualism and DIY, 100%. Like, if anything, like look at these like 16, 17-year-old little, SoundCloud guys, they are able to create their own music, their own art, their own fame, their own level of success with just what they have in their head and a computer microphone, just something like this, what I mean? And they can create followings. And the thing is, like, there is a massive craving for it, because if it weren't, a lot of these kids wouldn't be as successful as they are. And I absolutely love it. I absolutely love it, because now you get to see who truly has that passion for what it is they want to do, and that unique skill, and like that weird talent that a lot of people don't know about. And it's an acquired taste, just as in back in the day, like, punk was an acquired taste, and it was a statement. These kids are making statements, and I feel in a weird way, it's all like it shares lines, because like now, you have this entire movement that basically is saying, like, screw this system, I'm gonna do it my way. Just like back in the 80s, it was screw this system, I'm gonna do it my way, and this is who we are. And like, I don't have to follow the scripts. I'll write my script. And I think that's a beautiful thing, because I've always embraced it with myself. Making conscious decisions to like basically go, I'm going to do it this way. And if I don't do it this way, then I'm not going to do it at all, because I believe in dying on my own sword, and I believe in falling on my own mistakes. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? I'm not going to blame anyone else. I'm not going to if I am going to blame anyone else, it would only be because I know for a fact that I tried and did every single thing possible to set myself up for success. You know what I mean? And then still I'll be critical of myself. And I think that's a lot with a lot of these kids too. And that creates like a very different environment and a very different mindset. Kids didn't grow up the way that you grew up when you were a kid, especially nowadays. And the same for me. I'm 36, and I look at these kids, and sometimes I'm like, wow, we're only 20 years apart, but there's already such a massive gap between us. And you're already so far ahead, like mentally, than where I was 17, because of what is available, right? I think that, and maybe I'm drifting a little bit too far off from what we're talking about, but I guess
there's no
conversation, right?
You can't drift off on this show. Don't worry.
And like, there's like on the one hand, I don't like social media because it creates a lot of like disingenuous people. There's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of misinformation that people latch onto. There's a lot of like problems in terms of people being afraid of being wrong because they have what they think all the information available, but in reality they don't. They have a fraction of the information available. But at the other side, there's a lot of people that like embrace the knowledge that they can find, and they use it to learn, and they use it to create, and they use it to make something out of themselves. And especially that second part is the one that I applaud. And that those are the people that you're talking about. Those are those kids, and those are the the early 90s like explosion of like of people. And sure, like the answer to the question, I had part of it, but I was also around when it wasn't there, so I saw the transition. Absolutely.
Yeah, and it feels like it must have been a huge shift to suddenly, like, be making your own merch and controlling your own merch, and just sort of like seeing that side of the game change, where you could suddenly become, you didn't necessarily rely on promoters in the same way that you would have in a different time. I imagine a few years earlier.
Look at a guy like Danhausen.
Mm-hmm.
He's the perfect example. Here's a dude who tried something and it caught fire.
Yeah.
And that's great. I love that. Never met the guy. I think I knew him before he was Danhausen. At least I think he was a wrestler before. I just think he tried this and like it kind of just became a thing for him, to the point where Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson is retweeting him.
I was just talking about this today with my friends that were over.
You know what I mean? And like, I love it. I love it because why not?
Yeah.
Why not? You know what I mean? And, like, when it comes to that, when it comes to something like that, like, creating yourself, but there's also the flip side of me as a wrestler, right? And I gotta find a way to work this without coming across as like a bitter old veteran, because I don't want to. But I feel that there is also an incredible, massive saturation of wrestling and wrestlers, that I feel that some of the people who are training people or are around, it kind of gets watered down a little bit. Back in the day, for me, there wasn't a thing as a wrestling school. Mm-hmm. And Robbie will tell you this too, because I trained with Robbie. We had to travel to Germany, pay X amount of money, and then we got in the ring with Robbie for 2 hours, and he would beat the shit out of us. You know what I mean? And, yeah, and like that. Yeah. But we would repeat that every single week. We would travel all over Europe to get training. We would do training camps, because there wasn't like I'm here in Florida. In the span of half an hour drive, I can find 4 wrestling schools. Mm-hmm. That is a good thing, but also a bad thing, because, depending on which school you go to, you're either going to get really good training from people, who've been at the top, like Devon Dudley's school, great school, like amazing credentials, but then there's also the local whoever that bought a ring and worked 5 matches and now is training people, you know what I mean? And that waters down the amount of talent that, and the amount of knowledge that gets passed on, because there is a substantial amount of knowledge in terms of professional wrestling that, I can tell from when I sometimes look at people wrestling, and it's not a bad thing, because everybody has to learn, and that's okay, but you're also having to be willing to learn. And like I just said, a lot of people are afraid of being wrong. So, a lot of people now in the business, like, I feel like are very, a little prickly on giving feedback or taking criticism. And I've been a big proponent of always asking for criticism. Doesn't matter who in the business I was able to talk to. I did it. Like, I would even back, even in the WWE, like, despite being in wrestling so long, the one thing that I've always learned, and the one thing that I've always been convinced of, is that you're never done learning. The day you tell yourself, I need more training, or I need this, is the day that you stop progressing as a professional. Any true professional knows that you always have to search for more and have to have more knowledge available and more eyes on what it is that you're doing. And sure, you have to be specific on who you're asking their opinion, but you're going to have to progress regardless. And I think that's something that I sometimes, when I look at wrestling here and there, local, or in my direct surroundings, I see, and I wish that like this generation would just come up to me and say, "Hey, Tom, would you mind, can you take a look what I did wrong?" Or like, "Hey, that didn't feel any good. What do you think?" Or, because, I still keep doing it, like for the longest time. And, I would walk up to Roman and say, like, "Did you watch it?" Like I would pick his brain. Like, he's only the biggest name in wrestling. You know what I mean? He's the guy that carries the business, like at the moment. And but also like back then, like I would ask Cash and you know, and Dax, like I hold those boys in high regard. And even though we wrestled on the same shows together and we wrestled each other, and you know, that doesn't mean that I can't, you know, that I can't support. And he does the same to me. He will ask me like, hey, what you think? You know what I mean? Because the perspective of anyone on a certain level is valuable.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same with music, right? You're gonna have to expand on your knowledge, because there's something to learn every single day. And I the message here is that, like, take advantage of that knowledge that is available. Take advantage of the people that are willing to spend time with you and like teach you and like show you the way, and you know, make you a better professional.
It's interesting to watch wrestling kind of shift, though, like you're describing, from this thing that it has been, like this tradition that goes back centuries at this point, that's been passed down, where you had to kind of like, it was like the knowledge, you had to get the knowledge, you had to be given the knowledge, and it was hard to get the knowledge, to where it's now shifting to almost where it's like much more like in music, you have almost like this artist mentality where it's like, I don't need your criticism, I'm doing my own thing. If you don't get it, forget you. Like it's weird to, like, you know, and obviously I'm a huge fan of, like, and I very much understand, because of the physical risk involved, why you need that discipline. But it's very interesting to kind of watch as this sort of shift is happening, very much in the same way it happens with music now, or like, you know, you talk to people in hip hop that, you know, or rap music that don't understand, like, or not even necessarily don't understand, I shouldn't put it that way, sorry, but don't like where it's shifting, where it's not necessarily about the skills as it once was. It's now more about just personality for the sake of personality.
Right. Yeah. Because, you know, in the same vein of what we were just talking about, you know, a lot of the basics, as we call them, you know, they get lost. You know, like one of my friends is Vinny Pass from Jedi Mind Tricks.
Absolutely.
You know, him and me like kind of spar every once in a while. Like, you know, we'll have a conversation, mentally sparring, not physically sparring.
I was gonna say,
you know,
he's got to be hard to do that.
He's a badass. But you know, and like I've spoken to him where, like, you know, when it comes down to, like, you know, his roots and where he started versus like where kids can start now. And there is something to say about quality, but the real ones will always float at the top. You know, like everybody knows how to pick out the real ones, and the real ones will always be respected. It just comes down to the grind. It comes down to the work put in. And to your point, but it might not always be enough, because sometimes it just doesn't work out that way, you know. And as long as you feel, you know, to yourself, like I said, that you at least did everything that you could to put yourself up for success, just don't be in a position ever where you look back when you're 60 years old and you go, you know what, fuck, I should have listened, or I should have done this, I should have like invested in that, you know what, I should have, like, I don't know, tried more freestyle, I should have, like, you know. And I think that's a big thing when I hear a lot of like the old hip hop heads like talk, you know, like there's a lot of like production, and it's a lot of like creation that is like out of the hands of the of the person involved, out of the hands of the talent, and more in the hands of like, no, this is what we want you to do versus this is what I should be doing. And that's also the way of the world. Like everything progresses. So I'm always on the spectrum of you know, the old and the new. Like Terry Taylor always told me, you are the perfect blend between the old school and the new school, because you obviously have a style that caters more towards where modern wrestling is, but your mindset for a big party is more towards, you know, the old school way of wrestling, in terms of like making it legitimate, like working your holds and stuff like that, and like just like little detailing things that, you know, he used to teach me. So I feel like I can always kind of keep one foot in the past while looking at the future. And so for me, it translates different. And that's why, like, when I look at certain individuals that are wrestling, I'm like, oh, if you would just change that, you know, it would make a world of difference. Or if you would just implement moving this way, it would make all the difference for your style. You know what I mean? And but I think that's the way of the world now. With everything being so exposed and everything being so open, and with everything being around so much. And there's good things and bad things about it. And there will always be good things and bad things about it. But, you know, I'm not the one to decide whether it's good or bad.
Yeah.
I'm just a part of the chain that will forever keep rolling. And I'm glad to be a part of that chain. And I'm glad to be an important part of that chain as of now, but when my time comes, when it's over for me, I would say that anyone's life expectancy in the wrestling business is about 2 weeks. After about 2 weeks, people have forgotten about you, and that's fine because there's new talent coming up. This is an everlasting, ever-changing business that picks people up and eventually puts people at a station, and it's all about what you've done prior that will predict what station you're stopping at. Is that a station of regret? Or is that a station of fulfillment? And I would say always work as hard as you can to be in a position of fulfillment, and always have a critical eye on yourself. And, don't be afraid to just get criticism and ask for criticism, because believe me, as a professional, you're going to feel more fulfilled. You're going to feel more like you're working to your goals, that you're closing the gaps in your game. And that can be for hip hop, that can be for wrestling, that can be for any type of discipline you have in your world. That's how I did it. That's how I got where I was. And I know, for me personally, if it would all end tomorrow, I wouldn't have any regrets.
Mm-hmm.
I would not have any regrets. Are there things that I would have perhaps now, with hindsight, done different? Yeah, but that doesn't mean that I regret them. I'm glad that it happened that way, because now I know, when it happened again, I knew what to do. Failing is not bad. It's about what you do with your failure, that, again, what station you're going to be dropped off,
I think it's also because now we have to fail so publicly, like it was at one point
Yep.
you could have a private failure, but now it's like, and on any level, like you fail, your friends are going to know about it on Facebook, even if you're not in the public eye at all.
Yeah. It's scary. And it's frightening. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, are these people are you really worried about people that only are exacerbating your failure because it makes them feel better about themselves?
And there's a lot of that,
because that's what it really comes down. What's that?
I was going to say, there's a lot of that on the internet. I think a lot of people need that up from tearing people down.
Yeah, but in the long run, it doesn't change anything about you.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if you're not let it. It shouldn't do anything to you in terms of it's not gonna make your value less as a person, as a human being, because failure is such a massive part of life. But the fact that people who exploit your failure, it's weird to think that people don't accept the fact that failure is a part of life.
Yeah.
It's weird. That to me is a very strange thing to project,
mm-hmm.
because you're going to fail no matter what you do. You're not going to pick up a sword and be the perfect sword fighter. You're not going to put gloves on and be the perfect boxer. That just doesn't exist. You're not going to be a wrestler and be the perfect wrestler. That just doesn't exist. That's what failing's for.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to publicly humiliate yourself, it's going to suck. But that's what failing's for, because now you know what not to do. And what not to do is often the best teacher, but we're so afraid of it nowadays, which I think is a shame.
Yeah. I guess going back to the very beginning of your journey, where were you kind of getting into aggressive music from? Where were you hearing about this stuff? Because it isn't mainstream music.
No. So my brother had a mixtape. My brother had a friend that was very much into Iron Maiden. And he was into Iron Maiden and Metallica and stuff. And he had a little tape. So I would sneak into my brother's room and I would put the tape on, because they would bring home on birthdays. I was 7, 8 years old, and they would bring out the album art for Iron Maiden's Killers. You see Eddie with the knife standing, and it's the woman in the back, and it's I think it was the Hammer. It might have been the Hammer. I'm not completely convinced, but not completely sure anymore. But that's really brutal album art. And then I wanted to listen to the music, because I was well, if this is I got drawn to it, and that's kind of how Iron Maiden started for me. And then my parents were always more into guitar music, Fleetwood Mac was like frequently played. Dire Straits, like I was a big Mark Knopfler fan. Like growing up, I thought his guitar was phenomenal. Eric Clapton and Stills, Crosby, and Nash. And, you know, it was predominantly more guitar, rhythmic music, Golden Earring. You know, you name it, and I love him. And then by the time I was like 11 or 12 years old, we had this this television channel called The Box, and they kept playing Replica by Fear Factory. And I got so hooked on that song that I bought the album. I bought Demanufacture. And that was the first album I ever bought as a kid when I was like 11, 12 years old. That was the first album I ever bought. It was about like 96, 97. And that was my start into my own personal, I still have the CD, like my own personal collection. I think then the second one that I bought was Biohazard's On Civilization. And then it was, New World Disorder. It was New World Disorder. I bought Damned in Black by Immortal, and I bought, what's the third one? I hate that I can't remember. No. What was the third one? Actually, the third one was Afura, Body of the Mind Force.
Okay.
I used to love Afura. I thought he was great. So basically, I had the more industrial metal with Fear Factory. I had, you know, the bleak black metal sound with Immortal. Then I had the more hardcore, urban hardcore punk with Biohazard, and then like getting my underground hip hop vibe going on with Afura, and then later with Gang Starr and Guru, and you know, bands like Defari, Cannibal Ox. You know, you name it. And that's kind of how I got introduced to all the music, and I was skateboarding at the same time. But then Jesus and the Gospel Fucker came, and it just kept progressing. And then like I got into like Dimmu Borgir and Cannibal Corpse, and you know, it just Entombed, Overkill, and it just kind of kept on growing and growing and growing, and you know, all these influences, and that's kind of how it started, and it just never let me go. I was a big fan of anything that was alternative. For me, it didn't matter if it was Obituary or Linkin Park, you know. And the thing is, like, I feel like a lot of times people have a hard time admitting that they liked something as Linkin Park because it makes them feel compromised about the legitimacy of the music that they liked. But man, for me, I remember hearing Korn's first album, and I thought to myself, it was like 97, 98, and I remember going like, man, I've never heard this before, you know? Mm-hmm. And same with like early installments of Manson, and, you know, can't really mention his name anymore, but, you know, like the early installments of Manson was something that is, you know, that made an impact on me. And then 80s, like end of the 80s Cradle of Filth, early 90s Cradle of Filth, where they were like a strange form of like thrash leaping into like gothic death metal, like to become what I liked theatrical bands. And that's like now, like, you know, for instance, like seeing a band like Behemoth growing the way they did from that bleak black metal sound to this like massive presence on stage and these super like fascinating atmospheric music videos and songs that they're making. Same with like Shining, and you know, those types of bands. It's just amazing for me to watch that, and you know, it influences me even to this day. Clearly, the Aleister Black character was influenced by music. Clearly, anything I've ever done with Tommy End was influenced by music. You know, early installments of Tommy End were like based on like, you know, hardcore bands. And, you know, I carried that flag. That's why I came out with Trapped Under Ice and a Cruel Hand and stuff like that, you know. And that's it has to go hand in hand for me with my characters in terms of the music that I listen. It has to, because there has to be a form of legitimacy in my characters. There has to be something of me in there, and more than just a thing. A lot of it is me. A lot of it is like it's expressionism to me. It's my way of conducting my creative flow to the masses.
Mm-hmm. It's amazing how how much music can play a role. Like you're saying, like Trapped Under Ice and like all that kind of stuff with you. It does define who the character is, but it also allows you to kind of put yourself out there as who you are, kind of behind the character as well.
Yep.
Were you in a Funeral Oration or NRA at all?
Nope.
Just any of that sort of weird Dutch punk stuff that was happening at that time too? Skate punk?
No. So I was never really like, I was into Perestroika, which I don't know if you ever heard of them.
No.
They were a local band. There were a lot of local bands. I'm trying to think. It's like, man, you're making me dig.
That's right what this is. Mental X-Lax, this show.
Yeah, Perestroika. I already mentioned 21 Gun Salute. Man, I have to dig through all this stuff. There was at one point there was also a massive wave of a lot of kids from Brazil that were like in metal bands that lived in the Netherlands. Agreon was one, and a lot of them had like ties to like Sepultura and Soulfly.
Oh, amazing.
And they lived in the Netherlands, and you know they started their bands. Cancelled was a big one that I was a big fan of. And you're making me dig real fucking hard right now.
Where did you hear about Trapped Under Ice and Cruel Hand and those bands?
Just the scene.
Just from going to
shows. You're in the scene, and I remember that, like, especially Trapped Under Ice, they blew up in the span of like when they dropped Believe. Everybody was like, "Who's that?" Because that riff was one of the hardest riffs at the time. That song made everybody one violent motherfucker. When that song came up, everybody wanted to fight. And you know that's the cool thing about like hardcore. And you know they came and they did their thing and they kind of went again. I don't know what they're doing now. I know, like, I mean, obviously they have
Angel Dust and Turnstile were the two bands.
A lot of them are in Turnstile.
Yeah.
I don't think they're doing much anymore. I don't think Trapped Under Ice.
No, I think they do reunions once in a while. They do big festivals, but like for the most part, I think it's Angel Dust and Turnstile are kind of like the focus for them now.
That's what the focus is. Yeah. Cruel Hand, you know, kind of the same. I love Cruel Hand. I think that they're, you know, the early work to now, you know, a band that changed, but still has the same vein of like love and passion. You know, like once you get into that scene, you know, you learn so many like new bands, especially when you're like in the Netherlands. Like obviously our exposure to the US scene isn't as big. But you know what, like the big ones that make wave, like Expire and stuff like that. Obviously, you know they run over Backtrack and stuff, and you know it's just like being in the scene. And a lot of people, you know, there's always people like you, right, that have like that have their ear on the ground all the time, and they have all the records. And that are like connoisseurs of like that genre of music that every once in a while will like feed you something. One of my best friends, Pablo, is one of those people. Always has new records, always keeps his ear on the ground, always like will slide me a band saying, "Hey man, you might like this." And 90% of the time he's right. And I do love what he says because you know he knows me and knows what I like. And you know, music is such an ever-changing landscape, and it's such a massive landscape because there is so incredibly much of it, and I'm so happy that there was so much of it. I learn new bands each and every single day. When people, one of the worst questions that someone can ask me is, "What is your favorite band?" I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, I can give you about 100 bands that I love. Are they all my exact favorites? Yes and no. You know, it changes every day. Like, I'll get into Cruel Hand for a while, and then I'll get into Shining for a while. One of the bands like right now that I, for some bizarre reason, started listening to again is Ghost BC or Ghost. And I was listening, I was like, it's so catchy. You know what I mean? It's fun. And next week it will probably go back to like a Gatecreeper or something like that. You know what I mean? It just like it's an ever-changing landscape for me. It depends on what my mood is, where I am in my week, where I am in my training, and where I am as a human being, and a person to what I at that moment really, really, really like and really want to listen to.
It's funny you said that, like, you know, there's a lot of the American stuff doesn't really make it over to Holland as much, because in my experience going over there, playing in a band and also just like traveling there, it's amazing how deep the love of sort of like rock and roll, for lack of a better umbrella term, is, like just how
Sure.
pervasive and how deep people go. Like going to Independent Outlet for the first time, I was blown away by the records I found there. Like I just couldn't believe some of these bands, and like,
Independent outlet.
great store. I went there last time we played Amsterdam. I went in there and they had buried all the records behind t-shirts and bookshelves, and I physically moved
Yeah.
the stuff to get the records out from behind the wall.
Did you ever go to Budisk?
No, what was Budisk?
So Budisk was the biggest international import of CDs, records, DVDs. It's actually where I, back in the day, bought a lot of like my first like animes as a 15, 16, 17-year-old, where I got into like, Vampire Hunter D,
Yeah.
Ninja Scroll, Wicked City, Blood the Last Vampire. Like a little bit more of the other types of like animes, and they had all these like really cool international DVDs. Specifically, one of the horror movies from Japan. They were obviously a big hit, but they would sell like a little bit more of the obscure like black metal and hardcore and like punk stuff, other than like Independent Outlet.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that store unfortunately has been dead for I think 10, maybe 12 years now. They closed it, which was a shame because it was a staple mart for like, people that were into like different types of music and different types of movies. But like, I'm glad to hear that Independent Outlet is still going strong. So
Yeah, no, definitely. It seems like music has taken much more of a backseat to clothes. But if you dig behind those t-shirts, there are still records to be found. I bought a first copy of the first Devo 7-inch, a first press, which is crazy. I couldn't believe
that's a gem right there.
I know. I was like shocked that I had found that thing there, but it is a favorite stop for me every time I get a chance to go over there. Tommy, I've kept you for a very long time, and I could punish you forever. Would you come back at some point down the line for a part 2?
Yeah, man, absolutely. I enjoyed this conversation very much. I am going to leave you with a story that I promised to tell you. You're telling me a Jun Kasai story. So back in my first tour with Big Japan, there was a wrestler named Yoshihitsu Sasaki. And
Yes.
You probably know who that is.
Yes.
One of the most phenomenal talents that Japan's ever had. And he's a bus driver nowadays. He actually was in a reality show for a while. So, but before that, obviously, he was the awesome wrestler named Yoshida Sasaki, right?
Yeah.
And every night after the show, him and Jun Kasai would get into it with each other. Like it started with like pushing and kind of cursing at each other and yelling at each other. But every day it progressed. It got worse and worse to the point where I remember telling my tag partner, Don, like, I think they're going to fight each other at some point. And he's like, yeah, dude, this doesn't look good at all. And then it came to blows in the bus. And they literally fucking dove on each other and started fucking decking each other in the face. And I'm telling you, they were not holding back. So in my panic, I go, guys, stop fighting. So I grab Yoshido and I pull that gigantic human being because he's a big boy. I pull him off, and Abdullah Kobayashi pulls Jun off the floor, and I'm kind of like, what do I do, right? And then they look at me and they look at each other and they kiss each other full in the mouth, and they looked at me and they ripped me for 4 days straight, and they picked fights with each other deliberately so that I would see it in the hopes that when it came to blow, I would pull them off each other and kind of like, so it was a big rip.
Yeah.
So they were fucking with me for 4 days straight, and they noticed that I was like kind of getting concerned with like them progress, but they played it so goddamn well. But that's apparently what they did with the new Gaijin. That's what was one of their ribs.
That is so awesome.
Yep.
I think he is.
Jun Kasai.
He is the craziest monkey of them all.
Yep. Good human being though. Tons of respect for Jun Kasai, tons of respect for Yoshida Sasaki. My time in Big Japan is among my favorite time in professional wrestling. It was phenomenal, just phenomenal. I always say to people that hate deathmatch wrestling, watch the Japanese guys. Watch Big Japan do it. Watch guys like watch guys like Jun Kasai, watch, Jackie Numazawa
Takeda.
man, yeah. Oh, Takeda. I'll save that story for another time, but I have a good story about him too. Yuko Miyamoto,
Yes.
Isami Kodaka, watch guys like them, because to me, they were masters of building suspense in the death matches, and they weren't just like throwing people through piles of glass for the sake of doing it. The complexity of their stories was fascinating for me to watch. I watch everything from the perspective of the artist. And even though it might not be my cup of tea, I respect the art that is being presented to me.
Mm-hmm.
And they did some wonderful stuff watching it. And I will never take that away from them. Despite, again, deathmatch wrestling isn't for me. But they created something that and the funny thing is, my tag partner was even a lesser fan of deathmatch wrestling. He didn't like it at all. But even he, after the shows, after our match was done, would slide up to the front and just kind of watch them go at it, because it was like, I remember watching in God, what's that venue called? Rings One, I think.
Ring, yeah, for First Ring, Tokyo First Ring.
First Ring, Tokyo, yeah.
Yeah.
Watching them have this crazy scaffold match in front of maybe 300 people, and it was exhilarating to watch. It was just the best, man. And I guess, I think that's punk rock, man, right there. I think that's what it is. That's what it is. That's punk rock.
Mm-hmm.
That was that punk feel. That was that hardcore feeling. That was that close, intimate feeling, watching something unique, something special that was there for a select group of people, for a select set of eyes. And it was wonderful to watch. Absolutely.
And you hit the nail on the head right there, because it is like punk rock. It is like black metal. It is like grind. It is something that the people that aren't going to get it, but the people that understand it, like, can appreciate it and see the brilliance in it and stuff.
Yep. No, absolutely. Absolutely, dude. It was crazy. It was a fun time to watch. And absolutely enjoyed my time there.
Well, I have enjoyed my time here, Tommy, and anytime you want to come back and talk about Jesus and the Gospel Fuckers or anything, please know.
Let me sit on it and see if I can conjure up some good stories, because I definitely have a few. Crazy Fred.
Thank you, Tommy, for coming on the show. And you heard right there, Tommy will be back for a part 2 at some point in the near future to blow our minds with more Jesus and the Gospel Fucker stories. And yeah, he is a really, really awesome person, really fun guy. Check out his stuff on social media, even though he isn't a huge fan of it. Check out his wrestling. Like, really watch what he does in the ring. And yeah, prepare to get entertained, get stoked. All right. Speaking of getting stoked, I am very stoked for what's coming up later on this week on the show, for something completely different. An incredible writer, an incredible musician, songwriter, in several bands. Japanese Breakfast, aka Michelle Zahner, is going to be here, and it is a fantastic conversation with, I'll say it like a genius. She is a genius writer, not just songs, which, it was kind of established, obviously, but also now as an author. And we get into all this. We talk about grief. It's actually just a really interesting conversation. I'm excited for you to hear it. We're having a fun time over here on this podcast, and an interesting time. And I'm very stoked that you are all along for this ride. That's it for the show. Remember, as always, Black Lives Matter. The lives of Indigenous people matter. We need to protect trans kids. We need to help trans people protect themselves. We need to stop hate and violence towards Asian people. And we just need to stop hate and violence towards people of different faiths. And it's a real moment of just things that are being brought to light, which should have been brought to light a long time ago, things that people have known about that have been happening, injustices are being exposed. Things are just happening in this world right now. It feels like a time of great flux. I don't know. Maybe you feel this too. Get involved. Go out and look at organizations, look at people that are doing good work, volunteer time, volunteer money to causes that you believe in. And I guess like the end all and be all is just fuck fascism and there's no place for Nazis, and this shit's not political. There's lots of stuff you can talk about that's political. That's like, how much money goes to road maintenance, and like there's lots of politics stuff that can be discussed. But these are human rights issues, and obviously there's some bleed over to, politics stuff and financing of institutions as well that certainly needs to be addressed. But these things that we're talking about, there's no discussion about. These are just things that we all need to be aware of, and we all need to take part in to have a beautiful, interconnected society. We're living in a society, as the kids on the internet are prone to say these days. So get involved and help make that society a little bit better for those kids when they get off the internet and get out there in the world. And, go out there and do something creative for yourself. Start a band, start a fanzine, put up a piece of art. You don't have to share it with anyone. Just do it for yourself. Create your own culture. Make something. It'll help you feel better. Also meditation. I'm running on very little sleep right now. I'm not complaining, but I'm just telling you, I'm just running on very little sleep. Did a lot of shit today that, just takes a lot out of you and stuff. And I just sat down and I meditated before I came here and I talked to you, and my head is a little bit more together than it would have been beforehand. So, treat yourself, meditate, try it. Like, what's the worst that happened? It doesn't work, and you're like, those hippies lied to me. But try it a few times, because it took a few times for me to get it. I don't mean get it, but just for me to kind of click with it. Sign your organ donor cards, please. Just do it, because like it's the easiest thing. Like you're dead. Like you just take those things and then give them to someone else, and it can save someone's life and change someone's life. I've seen it happen. It's wild to watch it happen. It's amazing to watch it happen. What else do I say here? Stay safe. Wear a mask still, because there's still shit spreading and stuff. And I got a friend that was in a hospital. Shout out to Shadow Extreme. Really recently. So this shit's still happening. So, wear a mask and protect those around you, and stay safe. And I will see you on the next episode. Shout out to Oil and Flowers with my man Buddha Blaze. Listen to that podcast, available on your podcast platform. It's Buddha and Blaze and I talking about local greenery. And that's it. I will see you on the next episode. Bye.